going to be in Ezra chapter 6 this afternoon, first half of it. I don't know, I was studying this week and I thought, man, we are already in Ezra chapter 6. We haven't even finished chapter 1 of Colossians. That's okay. You will remember we left the nation of Israel rebuilding in Judah, part of Judah in Jerusalem. They are rebuilding the temple. They started a long time ago, decades past, more than a decade, and the project has not made any progress. And God sent two prophets to rebuke and encourage. Very interesting to me that those two things always go hand in hand. He sends rebuke and then he sends encouragement. And once we get things right with him, then he encourages us to get on and get what we need to do. And now we see them back at the building project again. The excitement is building, the fervor is building. A lot of progress is being made, and all of a sudden Tatney and these fellows come wandering in because somebody ran a title into them that they were building, and they're checking things out. Important detail that you need to remember as we go down through this afternoon. We're going to look at the royal response to the letter. What does Darius have to say in response to this letter that Tatnai and Shether, however you say his name, has sent on to them? And one of the things I really want you to realize is the first time the government authority from the king all the way down is very hostile to the Jewish people. And it didn't go well for them. They had a letter sent back that told them to stop building immediately. This time we don't. We see folks who are trying to do their job, but we don't see antagonism. They're not name-calling. They're not telling them to find out all the evil stuff that's going on. And so there's a far different response this time. But rather than just focus on the history of it, which would be easy to do, I want you to look behind the scenes a little bit with me this afternoon. Because I don't think God took the time to share in his word just a history lesson. Okay? It's written down in scrolls everywhere. It's preserved in all kinds of places. There's something more than just a history lesson that he wants us to learn. And so this afternoon, I want you to see God's faithfulness. And it's interesting as this King Darius is going to respond and send back to the folks that are in Jerusalem. Basically, you know, after a while of opposition, sometimes it wears on you a little bit, and you're wondering, seriously, are we going to have to stop building the temple again? But the response that comes back to them should have been a huge encouragement to them. Because really what they're going to do here is Darius is going to talk about the faithfulness of God in the past, in the present, and in the future. In just a couple of verses here. So let's read the first 12 verses of Ezra chapter 6. Then we'll bow for a word of prayer. Then Darius the king made a decree, and search was made in the house of the rolls where the treasure were laid up in Babylon. And there was found at Aknatha, in the palace that is in the province of the Medes, a roll. And therein was a record, thus written: in the first year of Cyrus the king, the same Cyrus the king made a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the house be builded, the place where thy offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, the height thereof 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 80 cubits, with 3 rows of great stones, and a row of new timber, and let the expenses be given out of the king's house. And also let the golden and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took forth out of the temple which is at Jerusalem, and brought unto Babylon, be restored and brought again unto the temple which is at Jerusalem, every one to his place, and place them in the house of God. Now therefore, Tatnai, governor beyond the river, Shethar Bosnia, and their companions the Apharsachites, which are beyond the river, be ye far from thence. Let the work of this house of God alone. Let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God in his place. Moreover, I make a decree, that ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of the house of God, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river, forthwith expenses be given unto these men, that they may be not hindered. And that which they have need of, both young bullocks and rams and lambs, for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the appointment of the priests which are at Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet savors unto the God of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and of his sons. Also I have made a decree, that whosoever shall alter this word, let timber be pulled down from his house, and being set up, let him be hanged thereon, and let his house be made a dunghill for this. And the God that hath caused his name to dwell there, destroy all kings and people that shall put to their hand to alter and to destroy this house of God which is at Jerusalem. I, Darius, have made a decree. Let it be done with speed. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, sometimes in the midst of adversity, it's difficult to see you at work. It's even more difficult to see you. And here we are again watching the nation of Israel as they try to rebuild the temple and do something that you asked them to do, and they've come upon adversity. Rather than be discouraged, they keep on building this time, and they keep on accomplishing what you asked them to do. And then they get this letter, which should be excitement for them as they learn of the faithfulness that you've had to them in the past, your faithfulness now, your faithfulness in the future. And I trust that when hard times come my way, that I would see your faithfulness. I would see a loving God at work despite the circumstances. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You say, how in the world from this passage do you get the faithfulness of God in the past, in the present, and in the future? In verses 1 through 5, we see this letter being read to these folks of what Cyrus wrote a long time ago. Now remember, an awful lot of time's passed here. First thing I want you to see is he worked through Cyrus himself. Not only does he use Cyrus to give them permission and allow the rebuilding, which in and of itself isn't always a weird thing. Sometimes the kings in those days valued worshiping gods. We saw with Nebuchadnezzar, any god that came along, he was willing to add to the pile until he became so boastful that he built his own statue and had people worshiping him. But it wasn't uncommon for kings to allow temples and things like that. We've had people in the past who have said religion is the opiate of the masses. You want to control the people, then just control their religion. And sometimes, especially in places like France, the church and the state work together to try and manipulate the people and control the people. That's why the founders of this country said separation of church and state. They didn't mean that the state couldn't have anything to do with church. That they just said that the two powers shouldn't be working together. They should be working separate of each other. That's all it means. So for him to give permission to allow the rebuilding was an incredible thing. Unless you go back and reflect on what happened to destroy it. See, when Nebuchadnezzar went the first time, and he took Daniel, and he took all those folks, and they hauled their hangmen off to Babylon, did he destroy the temple? No. Did he destroy Jerusalem? No. He let them go on, and he would have allowed the temple, and the temple would have been fully functioning the whole time, if it wasn't for a few years later, they didn't want to pay tribute, and they didn't want to, and he kept having to deal with them. And the nation of Israel over and over and over again with foreign kings has been this way. And so finally Nebuchadnezzar had to come in and he got pretty strong with them, and he destroyed Jerusalem and they destroyed the temple. The Romans did the exact same thing. As long as the Jews were peaceable and paid their taxes, Rome could have cared less if they had a temple or if they had other things. But every time they rose up in rebellion against Rome, the emperor would get sick and tired of it. Seriously, we got to go. You've seen a map, right? I mean, you know how small Israel is. Can you imagine if you're emperor of Rome and you control this huge map and one of your generals walks in and says, those people right there, you'd get frustrated too. And so in 70 AD, Rome marches in and paid their soldiers with the gold from the temple. They burnt the whole thing down, and the gold ran down through the cracks, so they absolutely tore the temple apart and scraped all the gold out of the cracks. It was God's way of judging. But something that is interesting here is Cyrus provided his money for the rebuilding of it. It's not as common in history. Now, it has happened in history, but usually when a king wants to build a temple, he builds a temple to his God. He doesn't build a temple to somebody else's God, and he certainly doesn't do it in a country that's caused a lot of problems for him. But the thing I want you to see the most about Cyrus in these first couple of verses here is his promotion of God. Can you imagine? Darius finally gets the scroll, and somebody comes running up to the palace and says, "We found it," and they open up this scroll, and they get ready to read. Now, we're going to go back to Ezra chapter 1. And in the first 4 verses is Cyrus's words that are recorded in this scroll. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, verses 2, 3, and 4 is proclamation. Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth. Do you think when Nebuchadnezzar was making proclamations in his first year as king that he was saying the Lord God of heaven has given him all of them? No. We've seen many kings, not only from the Babylonian Empire, but when the Medes and the Persians took him over, and then when the Medes kind of died out and the Persians still remained, we've looked at all the way through Daniel and now all the way through Ezra. We've looked at a whole bunch of kings, and we've covered a lot of time. And you have this man who has preserved, and here we are decades later, and Darius has somebody open up this scroll, and he starts reading, and what he is looking for starts out with, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth. What an incredible testimony of God's faithfulness. And he hath charged me to build him. In other words, it doesn't say, it was my idea, and so I let them go. This is, God moved me to make this happen. What an incredible thing for Darius to be reading. Now, skip down to verse 3. It says, who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go to Jerusalem. Now, if I'm the king, and I want a temple built in Jerusalem, I walk outside and I go, you, and you, get your stuff, get your hind end over there, build the temple. And you know what you do? You get your stuff together, you haul your hind end in Jerusalem, you build a temple. Because your king told you to. But is that what Cyrus does? He sends out this edict throughout his whole kingdom, and he says, whichever of you, being Jews, let God move in your heart to send you back. And Darius is probably reading this saying, well, I mean, that's not really the way we do things. What's going on here? I mean, this is a whole different decree that's coming down from Cyrus than the way most kings operate. And then in verse 4, and whosoever remaineth in any place where he sojourns, if you decide not to go back, take up an offering and send back silver and gold and goods and beasts. It's just not unheard of. You're going to take up a free will offering, and instead of the taxes going into the Persian coffers, you're going to take up all this money and you're going to send it back to build the temple? Can I say that God worked through Cyrus in an incredible way? And here we are years later and several kings later, and Darius opens this scroll. And man alive, it has to jump off that dusty little leather and smack him right in the face. Go back to chapter 6. We talked about, when we were back in Ezra chapter 1, how important it was that he wrote it down. And here's the reason it was so important. God worked in preserving the edict. God still works the same way today. Do you know how many people who have just tried to destroy the Word of God? And there's some pretty incredible ways that he has preserved it and that he has worked through it. One of the most famous that we can think of are the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, they weren't hidden where you think they would be. They're in a little shepherd's cave out there, and, sea waters have risen or whatever. They could have been destroyed, and 1,000 years later, you can unroll them and read them. And you know what? You take our Bible and you take their Bible and you put them together and they match. Because after all the different translations and all the folks that have kept copying the Bible over and over and over again down through the ages, God is faithful and He has preserved the edict. Now, what would have happened if Cyrus had walked out and said, I have something really important that I have to say, and he had told everybody, and so they had scrambled together, and they'd taken up the offering, and all these people traveled back to Jerusalem, and then all of the problems that we have been studying the last couple of weeks come to pass. And here we are, 2 decades later or so, and they say, well, Cyrus said we could. And Darius says, all right, start searching through the library. Somebody find the edict, and it's not written down. It would have been hearsay. But instead, somebody comes running into him with a scroll, and he unrolls it, and there it is, word for word, just like the Jews said it was. The proof that Cyrus said exactly what he said. Now, look at verse 2. They looked in the treasure that were laid up in Babylon. Why did they look in Babylon for the scroll? Because that's where Cyrus lived and ruled. I mean, obviously it should be there. But in verse 2, where did they find it? They found it at Akhmatha, in the palace that is in the province of the Medes. Why did they find a Persian king's scroll in the summer palace of the Medes kings instead of at Babylon where it was supposed to be? Well, I don't know. I can think of one of 2 reasons. Maybe Cyrus used that as a summer place, and so he took his stuff with him, may have passed away there, and so all his stuff stayed there. Maybe it was like a presidential library thing like we do now. You know, president goes out of office, he builds a library, all of his memorabilia goes there. But it very well could have been that after Cyrus, some of the kings weren't so friendly to the nation of Israel. And you can't destroy it because it's written in stone, the law of the Medes and the Persians. You destroy it, oh, buddy. Oh, nobody has the authority to that. Not even another king can overthrow another king's edict. But you can take it and hide it so the Jews can't find it. And here we have Darius, who doesn't give up and say, well, I think they're lying because we searched through the whole library, and when we Googled it, we couldn't find anything. He doesn't just search through the library in Babylon, he searches through every library that he can possibly think of in the whole province, and they find it in a remote location. The interesting thing is, I want you to look at verses 3, 4, and 5, because Cyrus doesn't just write down that he allows them to go back and build the temple. Look at the details that we don't see back in chapter 1. There's a lot of detail here. In the first year of Cyrus, the king, the same Cyrus the king, in other words, somebody didn't write this for him, somebody didn't make it for him. Now that happened a lot, remember? Daniel got thrown in the lion's den because they made an edict and they got the king to sign it. What he's saying here is, this edict didn't come from somebody else and I signed it. Cyrus the king, even Cyrus the king, I made it. It is my idea. God moved in me. I wrote it. I signed it. Now look at the detail. Concerning the house of God at Jerusalem, let the house be built in the place where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid. He gives the height and the breadth. Those are the outside dimensions. With 3 rows of great stones, remember? He writes to Darius and he says, man, what kind of construction's going on here? They're using great stones and big timber. And right here we say, great stones and new timber. They said, the king even provided the money to do so. And it says, and let the expenses be given out of the king's hand. And they said, to prove it, we got the gold and the silver that Nebuchadnezzar took. And in verse 5 it says, and let the gold and the silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar took. You see all the details that he writes down? Who and when. He writes down what and where. You say, I don't understand. Why is that a big deal? Well, think with me for just a minute. Okay? In Sunday school, we have been studying about all these different kings that worshiped, some of them in Jerusalem, some of them in other places. How many of them have been worshiping faithfully in the temple the way God wants the nation of Israel to worship? There hasn't been an awful lot of them, has there? I mean, Lance is beating his head this morning going, seriously? Don't you feel that way when you start reading some of this? And Amaziah set these things up, and you're sitting there going, oh, what is wrong with you? What in the world is wrong with you? But listen, if they had simply said, go back and build the temple at Jerusalem, notice he didn't say, build it at Dan or Bethel. Were there temples at Dan and Bethel? You better believe there were. Where did they worship? The golden calves. And last week in Sunday school, it came right back up again, didn't it? You're thinking, finally, we're done with Baal, or finally, we're done with so-and-so. And the king turns around and starts worshiping the golden calves at Dan and Bethel again. And you're knocking yourself in the head going, what in the world's wrong with you? You have an ungodly king. Well, we don't know that he was ungodly the way he talks. God is working in his heart. And he is writing all the way from Babylon, and he's saying, you go back to Jerusalem. Don't go to Dan. Don't go to Bethel and rebuild a temple to the golden calves. That's not the God of Israel. That's not who they're supposed to be worshiping. That's part of the reason they're in this problem to begin with. Notice that he doesn't say, go to Samaria to the house of Baal. There's a temple in the house in Samaria to the house of Baal. You can read about that in 1 Kings 16 and 2 Kings 10. 67 times. Search it. I did a search yesterday morning because I was wondering about Baal. And so I started searching Baal throughout. And 67 references to the nation of Israel worshiping Baal at different times in their history. It very easily could have been misunderstood to build this temple for Baal. He doesn't say, build the temple in Bethshan. In 1 Samuel chapter 31, who do they worship in Bethshan? Ashtaroth. And 6 times in the nation of Israel, they went astray and worshipped Ashtaroth. But Cyrus doesn't write and say, go back and build a temple to Baal, or Ashtaroth, or to the golden calves that are in Dan and Bethel. He says, I want you to go back to Jerusalem. And now he's going to get really, really specific. Where they offered sacrifices, and let the foundations thereof be strongly laid, and the height thereof, and go down through the whole thing, and you are going to worship there. He even tells them the type of construction, the stones, and the timber, and the outside dimensions. Look at the detail. And then he tells them about the gift. And up until this point, we had just kind of looked at the gift and said, well, you know, it's pretty incredible that he would send it back. But I want to draw your attention to the last part of verse 5. It says, let the treasure be restored and brought again unto the temple, again, which is at Jerusalem. Now listen, this is detail. Every one to his place, and place them in the house of God. What did he tell the Jews to do when they went back to Jerusalem? You rebuild an exact replica of the Temple of Solomon. And you put every single thing back in its place. Do you know how many 100 cups and how many 100 lamps and how many 100 serving pieces that they carried back, some of gold and some of silver? And Cyrus says to them, when you go back and you rebuild it, these are the outside dimensions. You already know the inside dimensions. You know how to build this temple. You build it exactly like it was. And when you take that cup back, you put it exactly where it goes. Exactly where it goes. When's the last time you gave that detailed instructions to someone? How faithful is God in the present? in verses 6 through 11. Darius has been reading this. Does it have any effect on him? Well, obviously, Darius is one of those kings who respected the kings that were before him. Look at what he says. Now, therefore, Tatnai, governor beyond the river, Shethbar-Bozniah and their companions, the Apharsachites, which are beyond the river. Now, this is interesting because they wrote and gave the names of the leadership at Jerusalem. And when the king responds, he doesn't give any of the names of the leadership at Jerusalem, does he? But he gives the names of the accusers. He absolutely does. This is interesting what he says. Be ye far from thence. No meddling. Really interesting because Tatnai is a Persian official. So he says, government officials, no meddling. Apharsachites, those are the people who are living in Samaria. He says, people of the land, no meddling. If we were to translate, be ye far from thence, we would say it this way, keep your distance. You show up at a crime scene, and they don't want you contaminating it. So what do? They take that police tape and they rope it off. You know what the king's doing? He's taking king tape. He's roping off Jerusalem. And he's saying, don't go in here and mess with them. Don't contaminate the scene. You say, what do you mean contaminate the scene? Could you imagine if word got out? I mean, this is an impressive building that's being built. What if everybody just started sitting down on the sidewalks and watching this thing? What if they park their chariots up and down the roads and they're having a picnic while they're trying to get building material in and out and get everything done? You can imagine the traffic jams that would result. Not only does he say, listen, you're not going down there and stop them. Stay away and don't get in their way. There will be them alone. Don't hinder, don't stand there and gawk at them, don't get in the way, don't leave your chariot parked in the way of the cement trucks coming in. I know they didn't have cement trucks coming in. Tatnai's probably thinking, wow, this is something else going on here. But jump down to verses 8 and 9, because not only does he say, no meddling, he says, start sending them some serious money. Moreover, I make a decree that ye shall do to the elders of these Jews for the building of this house of God, that of the king's goods, even of the tribute beyond the river. Okay? So all of the taxes that are being collected on the other side of the Euphrates, instead of bringing them over here and putting them in the coffers, I want you to take them to Jerusalem. Forthwith expenses shall be given unto these men, that they be not hindered. Collect the taxes and give to the temple project. But, look at what he says. He says, money for supplies, money for workers, even money for offering the animals. Wow. Verse 9, and that which they have need of, both young bullocks and rams and lambs, for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the appointment of the priests which are at Jerusalem. Let it be given them day by day without fail. Can I ask you a question? How in the world does he know that the priests are supposed to get wheat, wine, salt, oil? When he reads Cyrus's edict, this is a wise king. He looks into this building project and he starts studying it, and he obviously understands how the priests and stuff work, because he says, you will send this not just for stone, and not just for timber, and not just for supplies, not just get in their way. Folks, there is a big difference between not hindering the project and actually helping it. And he says, you go and you make sure they have the money that they need for the project. And you make sure that the workers are well paid for. And you make sure that they have offerings for animals to be sacrificed. Now listen, who picks the animals for the sacrifice? Priest does. So you know what the king has said? You make sure that there's a bunch of animals there, and the priests will come out and pick the ones that they want. And the rest of them, they're not fit for the temple. So you better go find more, because they're going to keep needing more. Whatever they need. And the priests will tell you. And you go and you make sure. And so you have this ready supply of stuff that keeps showing up at the temple. Not only for building it, but for proper worship while they're building it and when they're done. What an incredible testimony to God's faithfulness. But look at verse 10. We also see a plea for mercy. That they may offer sacrifices of sweet savors unto the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and of his sons. Now, can I ask you a question? I'm not going to be political. Does President Trump have to come to Faith Bible Church and ask us to pray for him? Did Obama have to come to Faith Bible Church and ask us to pray for him? Should we have been praying for all of them? Why? Because 1 Timothy 2:2 says, for the king and for all that are in authority. Why? That we may lead a peaceful and quiet life. Darius doesn't have to order them to pray for him. He is simply providing the things because he knows that they will pray for him. Because it's something that God has asked them to do. Can I ask you a question? How in the world does the king know that? Is he presuming that they will pray for him because he helped build the project? I don't think so. I think he has been researching these Jewish folks, and he is learning something about the faithfulness of God, not only in the past, but right now. He's going to go one step farther in verse 11. Misrepresentation. Also I have made a decree that whosoever shall alter this word. You say, wait a second, why is that important? Do you remember the first letter that was sent? Hey king, you better go down to the library and Google this. And don't just Google Jerusalem and Judea. And see if these folks aren't a hateful and sinful people, a rebellious people. There's going to be great hurt to the king if they build these walls. They're not only building the temple, they're building... Wait a minute. Nehemiah's the one who rebuilds the walls. That hasn't happened yet. They're only building the temple. Misrepresentation stopped the building. But he says, don't alter the decree. You may not misrepresent what I say. And if you do, look at the consequences that he lists. Let timber be pulled down from his house and let it be set up and let it be hanged thereon. Has that happened before in the history of the Medes and the Persians? Happened with who? Artaxerxes, right? He married a Jewish girl. Her name was, and her uncle worked in the court and saved his life. But then there was this wicked guy who wanted to kill all the Jews. I think Mordecai means Hitler the First. Right? And what happened to him when the king found out what he was trying to do? He built gallows and hung him. Interesting. You tear the timber out of their house and you hang the dude on the timber from his own house. And then the rest of the house, just collapse the thing in, because from now on, it's going to be a menorah pot. Don't misrepresent the word of the king. God's faithful in the past, in the present, but look at verse 12, in the future. And the God that hath caused his name to dwell there. Whoa. Hold on just a minute. This is how I really know that this guy has done his research. The God that has caused his name to dwell at Jerusalem, who says that? I mean, so many of these different gods, they dwelled wherever you built a temple and wherever you set them up. And if one kingdom came in and conquered this kingdom, they would steal their gods, and sometimes they would take them back and build a house of worship and put their gods in there. And it wasn't uncommon, we saw that under Nebuchadnezzar, to have all kinds of different gods that were added to the list. They could have dwelled in Babylon, and a lot of them did. So why does he say, even though they hauled off all these people, and even though they tore down the temple, and even though they hauled off all the treasure, why is this king years later sitting here writing and saying, the God whose name dwells at Jerusalem? You want to know why? Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 12. We're going to read verse 5 and 11, Deuteronomy chapter 12. But unto the place which the Lord your God shall choose out of all your tribes to put his name there, even unto his habitation shall ye seek, and thither thou shalt come. Now, and jump down with me to verse 11. Then there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Thither shall ye bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows which ye shall vow unto the Lord. You say, why was it such a big deal when Israel parted from Judah, and that wicked king decides that he's going to make religion convenient? And so he sets up a golden calf at Dan, and he sets up a golden calf at Bethel on two separate sides of the kingdom to make it easier for them to worship. Why is that such a problem? You just read it. God did not choose to put his name in Dan. He did not choose to put his name in Bethel. He didn't choose to put his name anywhere but the temple in Jerusalem. And he said, when you bring your tithes and offerings, it might not be convenient for you to come from Galilee all the way down to Jerusalem. I didn't ask you if it was convenient. I asked you if it was the right thing to do or not. In 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 3. We read, and the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever. And mine eyes and mine heart shall be there, what? Perpetually. Now you want to know what's very interesting about this? He says forever, and he says his eyes and his heart will be there perpetually. But you know what used to be there that's not there now? His presence. Remember we talked about that on Sunday morning? How the presence of God rose up from the mercy seat and circled the temple and went and stood in the door, and then flew over top of the city, and it went to the east gate, and then it went up to the Mount of Olives and back up to heaven. And nobody noticed, and nobody cared. And his presence isn't in Jerusalem right now. In fact, on that very site now, there's a pagan altar built there. And the Muslims worship there. And they claim it as their own. But there's coming a time when he will be in that location again. And he will rule and reign from Jerusalem. Like he said, and his presence will be there again. But you know what? His eyes and his heart have never left. Never left. Isn't it crazy that Israel claims themselves to be as a country, way back when I was born, and here we are years later and we're still fighting about whether or not Jerusalem gets to be their capital. You want to think about that for a minute? Think of all the other countries that have changed names and have come together or divided over the years. Have any of the folks in the world ever fought over any other country where they wanted to put their capital? Where God said his name's going to dwell forever. And nobody likes it. Except somewhere along the line, Darius researched this. He got it. And he said, when you go back and you build a temple, you don't build it anywhere else, because God didn't put his name there. He put Jerusalem. Now go back to Ezra chapter 6, verse 12. Look at the warning that he gives. And if anybody shall put their hand to alter and to destroy this house of God, which is at Jerusalem, what's going to happen to them? Look at the first part of the verse. Let the God that caused his name to dwell there destroy all kings and people. Who's going to judge if someone decides to rise up against it? Is the mighty Babylonian Empire going to? No, they're not even around anymore. Is the mighty Mede Empire going to? No, they're not even around anymore. Is the mighty Persian Empire? No, because they're not around anymore. Is the holy, not so holy Roman Empire going to do it? No. Why? Because right after they destroyed the temple in 70 AD, do you know what started to happen to that empire? Look it up in your history books. They were thriving until they destroyed the temple in 70 AD. And immediately afterwards, they started to self-destruct. Because Darius said, it's not up to me. It's not up to you. It's up to God. He was faithful way back when Cyrus was on the throne. He's faithful now. And he's going to be faithful a long time after I'm dead and buried. And somebody's going to be digging up a scroll from Darius, and they're going to read this edict, just like I dug up a scroll from Cyrus, who was long, long passed from the scene. But you know who hasn't passed from the scene? His name is Jehovah, the omnipotent, only, all-seeing, all-powerful, deserving of worship God. Faithful then, faithful now, be faithful a long time after you and I are gone. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, sometimes it is easier for us to be distracted and forget your faithfulness. But help us to realize that part of being conformed to the image of your Son, Jesus Christ, is that we are to take on more and more of your character. Taking on that character means that we ought to be faithful also. Good times, bad times. When we understand, when we don't understand. Father, help us to be faithful. All we like sheep have gone astray, but please bring us back to the fold quickly, for that is where we thrive and do our best. Help us to understand the riches of the glory of Christ in us. Help it to explode in our lives and to share that message with everyone we come in contact so that they can explode in Jesus Christ. Until you choose to take us home or until you come back for us. May we always be found faithful. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Bye.